along with emotions such as anger, sadness, guilt, love, and others. Fear is one of the basic human emotions, but probably the one that many of us like to feel the least in life. We might enjoy a horror film and ducking behind a sofa, or adrenaline-fueled sports like snowboarding and rock climbing. But true, real-world fear, that feeling of when we genuinely believe that we are in mortal danger, when a moment plays out that feels like it could only possibly live in the darkest and worst recesses of our mind. No one wants to feel that. And that is what fear is at its core. It's our brain and body telling us that we are in danger. We are under threat. We need to get fighting or get running if we want to keep living. And this survival instinct for those life or death moments can be conjured up by playing video games. Why on earth should that be the case? My name is Graham Walker. I am a professional psychotherapist and lover of all things video game, and you are listening to GameFeel, the podcast which looks to better understand video game design so that we can better understand our own psychology and emotions, and therefore better look after our mental health. This season of GameFeel is focusing on the emotion of fear. How do video games elicit fear? Why do we even feel fear? And what can we do to manage this emotion in life and gaming? We begin our exploration in this first episode by looking how video games even manage to create fear in the first place. Without any real-world stakes, why do we feel scared when we play video games? Why don't graphics even seem to matter that much for this? What goes on in the brain to allow games to scare us? And what does this mean for what, if anything, we can do to manage our emotions when the fear gets too great? Recently, I was playing through the original Doom, the first-person shooter game, or FPS for short, that basically gave rise to the whole genre. An FPS is a game where you play through the eyes of the player character who you control. You inhabit this character's body and see what they see. And as you make your way through the world, if you see something, anything move, you shoot it. Because if you don't, then these things will shoot you, or claw you, gouge you, or try to end your life any way they can. This is kill or be killed. In Doom, you are dropped into a world of demons, imps, and other vile creatures of hell who will attack on sight without a second thought. With the game releasing for Christmas in 1993, as you might imagine, the graphics are pretty primitive compared to today's standards. Despite this, it successfully depicts you exploring a fully rendered 3D world, navigating round tight, maze-like corridors, where round any corner or behind any door or hidden platform, you will suddenly find yourself facing off against a host of enemies, ready to rip you limb from limb. The graphics may be blocky and simple, but the game gets across what it needs to. Surprisingly, I hadn't really played Doom before. I was around 7 when the game first came out, so I was too young. But with the game recently celebrating its 30th anniversary last year, it felt like as good a reason as any to jump into its hallowed halls of hell. And so, for the first time in my life, I booted up 1993's best-selling video game. I play through the first few chunky, pixelated missions of Episode 1 of Doom, and get my bearings in the game, get a sense for the controls. This does take a minute, as FPS controls in games have come a long way in the last 30 years. I try to get an understanding of the environment, that we are making our way through some sort of military base that has been overrun by the hordes of hell. I learn that my character will quickly begin to take damage when spotted by an enemy, and that my health meter will not last long if I don't watch my step. Despite its age, the game demands my attention and my respect. id Software, the team who made Doom, managed to pull off some highly impressive technical feats for the time. Enemies will react to the sound of your guns and come find you. Very detailed for the time environments, lighting effects allowing them to make areas lighter or darker, or even for lights to flicker on and off. Highly impressive stuff for 1993, but this is 2025, and though I can look back with some sense of appreciation, graphics, as well as what developers can do in games, have moved far past these humble beginnings. And yet, as I begin playing the 5th mission of this very early, very rudimentary by today's standards first-person shooter game, I notice something completely unexpected. I'm exploring part of the level. It's very dark. The corridors are tight, which does a surprisingly good job of creating a claustrophobic feel. Suspenseful music plays in the background. 'Tis the song you are hearing now, fittingly for this level titled Suspense. It's accompanied by growls and groans of nearby nasties. Then the enemies start appearing. They are high in numbers, and I begin firing on the oncoming crowd. Among them are a few demon monsters that have some sort of invisibility. It makes them show up as a merely flickering disturbance of the environment. They come at me quickly, and I find them tricky to target. Among them, other enemies are already beginning to fire back at me. They're just so difficult to make out in the dark, and I begin shooting wildly in response to this, spraying bullets indiscriminately. I try to get some distance between myself and the ensuing enemies, but the space is so cramped it's hard to move. And before I can do anything about it, they are descending on me and starting to rapidly eat away at my health bar. Suddenly, I notice my jaw tensing. I hold my controller a bit tighter. My breathing is a little shallower, and I can feel my heart starting to thump in my chest. Wait, am I scared? This 3-decade-old game made for hardware about as powerful as a modern-day microwave. This software that has genuinely been made playable on everything from calculators, fridges, ATM machines, and yes, even a literal modern-day microwave. This game is actually giving me a palpable sense of fear. How is it managing to do this? I press pause on the game, primarily to save for the 10th time in the last 10 minutes. And I notice the fear dissipates almost instantly. I feel the built-up tension drained from my body, and I'm left utterly confused by what just happened. I don't find the images on display particularly scary to look at. I know that I am in no danger, and I know that I can click save whenever I want, so I don't even have to be scared at the prospect of losing any progress. So, how can something so completely unrealistic looking by today's standards manage to conjure up such powerful emotions in me? To make sense of this, we need to seek to understand how the brain works and how it processes incoming auditory and visual stimuli. As we know, humans are just evolved apes. We became cavemen and developed further into the Homo sapiens of today. This means that we come with a lot of evolutionary baggage and a lot of limitations in the brain's functionality that we can't just patch out like so many game bug fixes. The evolved brain comes built in with a bunch of safety mechanisms to ultimately keep us alive. The caveman who could spot danger early and respond accordingly was less likely to get eaten by the sneaky, slinking saber-toothed tiger, and therefore far more likely to pass on their respond to danger quickly genes. This goes for all things that look like dangers. Better to respond to a mysterious shadow as something coming to kill us, rather than cuddle us. This is why now, when we wake up in the middle of the night and see a creepy-looking shadow, your head screams, "Burglar!" rather than whispering, "That's your dressing gown hanging on the back of the door. You're okay to go back to sleep." The modern brain cannot shake these old evolutionary habits. Another built-in system feature is responding to all incoming information, be it audio, visual, touch, etc., as if they relate to us, and to a greater extent like they are things possibly happening to us. The brain then creates an emotional and physiological response it deems appropriate for this something possibly happening to us. This goes for everything, including video games. Ultimately, the cavemen never had PlayStations, and so the human brain has not evolved well to be able to differentiate real threats from virtual ones. This is why scary movies work so well. When we see the spooky ghost or crazed murderer, a part of the brain thinks, this thing is going to get me. I need to get all worked up and panicky, so I'm ready to run away. But note that I said part of the brain in that last paragraph. Obviously, I'm not saying that we wholly and completely believe that what we see on a screen is real and even happening to us, but when we understand how the brain evolved, we can start to make sense of this idea. The brain is made up of several interlinked sections. The sections that we are interested in here are the limbic system, sometimes referred to as the feeling system, and the neocortex, known as the thinking system. If, whilst you're listening to this, you are free to use your hands, I would ask you to do something quickly with me. If not, you can likely imagine this pretty easily. If you take one of your hands and hold it generally in front of you, then tuck your thumb into your palm. Then with the rest of your fingers together, clasp them down to the bottom of your hand so that you have made a fist with your thumb tucked in. When you look at this fist, we get a very simple analogy for the brain and the systems we are talking about. Your clasped fingers represent the thinky neocortex, and the thumb buried underneath is the feely limbic system. You can see that though they are part of the same structure of the brain, they do inhabit different sections within the brain as a whole. And though they do not exist in isolation from each other, they can go about doing their own thing a lot of the time. Imagine two housemates. Sometimes they do things together, like cook a meal, and they are generally focused on the same task and outcomes at the same time. But sometimes they're still together, but doing their own thing a bit more. Perhaps in the evening they both sit on the sofa whilst one reads and the other watches TV. Then, whilst they're sitting there, maybe they hear a loud noise from upstairs, and one of the housemates jump out of their skin and screams, "What was that noise? I think somebody's trying to break in upstairs." "It's nothing," replies the other calmly. "I left my window open, and that's the noise it makes when the wind blows it shut." "I'm not so sure," the first one replies, still somewhat nervous. "Maybe I should go and check it out to be certain." And this is how the limbic system and the neocortex can operate together but apart. They experience the same things, but may give simultaneously different responses each. So, to briefly go back to the scary movie analogy, this is why, for some people, they sit, smiling and eating popcorn to the scary film. Their limbic system induces terror, while their neocortex is saying, "Man, I love feeling scared, it's such a rush, but that monster doesn't even look real or that scary." Now, if we go back to me playing Doom, as I pace around the tight corridors with the scary noises, dark lighting and suspenseful music, my limbic system is saying, "This looks pretty dangerous. Maybe something bad is happening. Let's push a fear response in case we need to fight or run away." The limbic system sees scary shapes and a scary atmosphere, not knowing that none of it is real or dangerous. It just responds like it is and creates fear. What triggers fear and to what degree differs from person to person, but there is always something for everyone, barring any conditions or disorders that might shift such a response. This means some people listening might be thinking, "Doom has never scared me," and that may be true. Despite coming from evolved functions of the brain, the response changes from person to person. But have a think about watching a film or playing a game that includes something that you would consider a phobia, say snakes, deep water or spiders, and think about how you and your body responds to these things. I imagine, despite being not real, just virtual images on screen, they can create quite a real fear response in you. I think this is a truly fascinating idea. The notion that the brain can be quite poor at differentiating reality from fiction and creating emotional responses that are the same or similar for both. To say it out loud sounds so stupid, yet so deep to my brain. Whether it is new information to you or feels completely obvious, to me it just feels so interesting. One of the things I find most fascinating in this is that the graphical presentation matters so little. As long as the brain can grasp the idea of what is being portrayed, it does not matter if the presentation is super high fidelity or pretty low fidelity. The fear response can still be activated. So the fact that I was playing a 30-plus-year-old game right at the birth of 3D graphics doesn't matter to the brain. Only that what those rudimentary graphics represent is something my brain can interpret as scary and therefore, in a sense, real. But, as I have alluded to already, everything I have said so far can be true for a horror film or TV show. They can create emotions like fear in us in just the same way. Though this is true, there are ways video games can induce fear that differ from other media, and understanding these helps to deepen our understanding of gaming more broadly and can help to reveal truths about ourselves too. Many of the reasons for how video games differ can be found in the answers to the question, couldn't the neocortex just tell the limbic system to chill out and that none of this is real? Couldn't that clever, chilled out housemate just remind their antsy buddy none of it's real and they're safe to calm down? And the answer here is yes, but not always. And by digging deeper, we can understand why. When I think about this situation of me playing Doom specifically, I can recognise that this is my first time playing the game. The controls, the level design, the systems and mechanics are all pretty new to me, even if that means older old-fashioned. And new to you things all take a higher cognitive load. It is worth pausing a moment here to define cognitive load, though most listeners, I would imagine, understand it well enough in a general sense. Cognitive can be defined as operations of the brain. It can sometimes be said to mean thoughts, but actually that would be cognitions in my therapy speak at least. And load refers to amount being dealt with. So cognitive load is the amount of things asking to be dealt with that require the brain to do something about it. Now, as I'm playing, I'm having to concentrate on which buttons to press on my controller, how to aim, how to navigate around the level, my strategy for addressing the enemies, their attack patterns, and more. Because this is all quite new to me, it requires much more thought than a seasoned Doom player. New and unpracticed skills and functions take far more cognitive effort than well-practiced actions, meaning the novelty of the task of playing Doom to me adds significantly to my cognitive load. It's a bit like your PC. When your neocortex is handling a lot of things, it is much slower to then start a new task, or maybe it won't even start doing it at all. For me here, my neocortex was so busy it didn't even register that the limbic system was starting to activate the fear center. Therefore, it didn't do anything to try and calm it down. This then also makes sense of why pausing the game had such a strong effect on how I felt. Not only did the scary pictures and music go away, but my neocortex could suddenly start noticing the fear and talking the limbic system down. We see how this differentiates fear when playing video games from other media like film and television. Because when we are actively playing, we likely have an increased cognitive load than when we are just passively watching, and that means the thinking neocortex has less capacity to calm down the feely limbic system. Understanding this can help us think about what elements can contribute to good game design, in horror games particularly, but it is also illustrative of design more generally. We can see how game designers can shift cognitive load to manipulate how much our emotions might get activated. Increasing the load reduces how much our neocortex can mediate our more natural emotional responses like fear. Whilst writing this script, I listened to an episode of the podcast Dev Diary from the games media group Second Wind, where they talked with Frederick Olsen, the creative lead for the horror game Amnesia: The Bunker. Frederick outlined how manipulating cognitive load can be done consciously in game design. He noted that when designing Amnesia: The Bunker, they purposely make it so every new run of the game is different. item locations are moved, consumable pickups change type or quantity, and an enemy would appear in different times and different places. Frederick noted that when developing their game, they realised that in changing these elements, it kept things unpredictable for a player, even on a second, third or fourth playthrough. And in keeping things unpredictable, it means that players could not just rely on prior knowledge and routine, but were kept on their toes and had to always be thinking what is happening in the game, then planning and replanning accordingly. This allows them to always maintain a greater cognitive load for the player, and therefore for repeated playthroughs to still feel scary in ways they otherwise wouldn't. This really helps to illustrate a great concept of game design, that by using strategies of overloading a brain's processing capacity, it can basically hijack the fear centre to prey upon that for other elements of the game. The opposite can also be true, that reducing cognitive load gives the player time to think and reflect on what is happening in the game. This is why a slow, quiet cutscene, designed to make the player think more deeply, is likely to be used to convey deeper, heavier messages. Being a cutscene naturally moves the player into a more passive role and can engage attention in a different way. There are many other ways in which game designers can, and in fact do this, with the conscious purpose of trying to manipulate your emotions in games. What can we learn from all this? There are three main areas where we can be drawing learning from through these types of explorations. Firstly, it can teach us to better understand game design. Not particularly to design games better. I think these tricks are already perfectly understood by the likes of Frederick Olsen and the other highly talented professionals in the field. But for us as players, it helps us to understand what designers are doing and what makes their choices so effective when they are. It also teaches us about how the brain and emotions operate. By seeing what triggers emotions and why, it gives us a better understanding into how emotions work for us. Finally, by understanding this, we can also consider how it can apply to us in general terms and what that means for how we may want to consider looking after our mental health. Starting from a game design perspective, we can look at TV, film, or other media and know that narrative, imagery, sound, atmosphere, and more all contribute to the emotional weight that thing can convey, and the whole plethora of human emotion that can be triggered with the right materials in the right hands. Because video games are an active media that can naturally add to the emotional weight, such as our inputs and decisions affecting consequences in the game. However, game designers can use specific strategies to manipulate how the brain can ultimately function moment to moment, and therefore work to heighten the emotional weight various sections of a game can convey. Managing cognitive load is one of those strategies. There are other strategies. Some of them will form part of the subject of our next episode of GameFeel. From a psychology perspective, being able to see how an emotion like fear, one that is designed to be a survival instinct, can be triggered in situations where our survival is at zero risk, helps us to understand a number of factors. It helps to illustrate how our brain treats incoming information. It treats it, at least in some parts of the brain, as things that might actually be real and happening, and therefore responds as such. It shows us that the thinking part of the brain exists separately from the feeling part of the brain, but that these sections do interact with each other. It also teaches us that these parts can become more disconnected, and when we are being made to think a lot, we are essentially less in control of how we feel. This information can teach us a lot about how we can manage our mental health potentially. But to see the whole picture clearly, there are other puzzle pieces which need slotting into place first. Many of these puzzle pieces will hopefully be provided as this season goes on. With the information we have so far, we can see that there is a connection between how we think and how we feel, and this is extremely important to understand. If we think back to our two metaphorical housemates of Thinky and Feely, we outlined how when there is a noise in the house, the Feely part of the brain started to panic. It started getting the body ready to fight or run away from a threat. And the Thinky part of the brain was able to reflect on what it was hearing and let Mr. Feely know that there was nothing to be scared of. Now, think of that same situation, but where Mr. Thinky has forgotten that he left his window open. Now when the first housemate starts getting scared that there is a danger, maybe Mr. Thinky responds by saying, "Oh my gosh, I think you're right, this is awful, what are we going to do?" Our emotional response of fear would have been hugely heightened. How we think about what we are experiencing and our emotions can have a huge impact on what happens next. If we take this same emotion of fear to a different situation, say a dinner party, we can further see the effect this can have. Perhaps at this dinner party there are some people there we don't know. Then maybe out of the corner of our eye, we see one of these people maybe giving us a funny look, and our stomach lurches, and we start feeling scared that we are being judged by these unknown entities of the party. If our thought in that situation is, "I must have said something wrong, these people must think I'm an idiot, this is so embarrassing," this is going to cause some pretty powerful emotions. And maybe we choose not to see those people again. Then, maybe we start feeling scared in other social situations, believing more that we are going to make a fool of ourselves. The consequence of how we think negatively in that moment can be far-reaching. But say in that same situation, we think, maybe they were giving us a funny look. I can't be sure. But either way, I am being kind, I'm not being rude or offensive, and if that person has taken a dislike to me, that is saying more about them than it is about me. Then how we feel and respond in that moment and after is going to be hugely different. For some, it may be perfectly obvious, but from my years of professional experience, I know that for many it is not. Our thoughts and emotions interact and impact on each other, and consciously reflecting on how we respond in our head to those thoughts and emotions can have a major impact, positively or negatively, on our mental health. This is just as true for life as it is in games. Thanks for listening. You have been listening to GameFeel with Graham Walker. The script was produced and edited by me and read by me. Audio editing and podcast production was done by me. Additional editing and production by Alex Allen. If you would like to hear more episodes of GameFeel, please be sure to subscribe on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. To get in touch for more information or to keep up to date with new releases and episodes, please be sure to follow our social media accounts on X at GameFeel UK or Blue Sky at gamefeel.bsky.social. Now, if you're anything like me, then this initial exploration triggers off even more questions about fear, such as how else can game designers manipulate fear? How do phobias work? And can games help to cure these deep-seated fears? These are questions we will try and answer together over the course of this series, continuing with our next episode, which asks, how can we be made to feel scared, even in the absence of graphics or any images? And what does this mean for how we can imagine our emotions away? Be sure to catch that on the next episode of GameFeel.